Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into the Lean Startup. We're going to explore some fascinating excerpts from the book. Should be pretty insightful. I'm really excited to hear your take on this one, expert speaker. Ries really goes against the grain of a lot of traditional business thinking, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. Ries is all about throwing those old business plans out the window. It's a totally new way of thinking, especially in the startup world.
Right. Think about a company like Intuit, the company that makes TurboTax.
Yeah.
They're huge, but they still have to approach innovation like a nimble startup. It's like Ries is saying that size doesn't matter. It's all about the mindset.
Exactly. And that mindset really comes down to something Ries calls validated learning. It's about proving or disproving your ideas, not with opinions or hunches, but with real actions from real customers.
Okay, so instead of spending months perfecting your product, you're saying it's better to test it out early on and keep refining it.
Precisely. Ries uses the example of IMVU, a company he co-founded. They had this idea for an avatar add-on for instant messaging. Sounded cool on paper.
Yeah, that seems pretty cutting edge for back then. What happened?
Nobody wanted it. But here's the interesting part. Instead of throwing in the towel, they talked to their customers, ran some experiments. Turns out what people really wanted was a whole standalone network to make new friends, all using avatars.
So their flop was actually the key to a whole new market.
Yeah.
That's validated learning, right?
Right. It's all about making those crucial pivots. And they're not based on guesswork, but actual feedback from the market. And for testing those new directions, you need a minimum viable product, or MVP.
Okay, the MVP. But isn't that kind of risky, putting out a bare-bones product? What if someone steals the idea?
It's a common fear, but Ries argues that in the world of startups, speed is key. An MVP isn't about perfection. It's about testing your core assumptions as fast as you can.
So better to learn quickly and adjust than get stuck in perfection mode.
Exactly. Remember Groupon? They started with handmade PDFs and pizza coupons. Can you believe that?
Seriously. It's crazy to think those humble beginnings led to what they are today. Any other examples that really showcase that MVP power?
Think about Zappos. They literally began by just testing the waters, seeing if people would buy shoes online. The founder handled the early orders himself.
Wow. It really shows that it's not about fancy websites or big teams at the start. It's about testing your assumptions, going bare bones. That's really inspiring, actually.
Totally. But there's a catch. Even with an MVP and validated learning, startups need a way to measure progress that goes beyond those vanity metrics. That's where something called innovation accounting comes in.
Innovation accounting. Sounds intriguing. So we're not just talking about downloads or website visits here.
Nope. It's all about focusing on milestones, learning milestones. Like, did a change actually impact customer behavior, or was it just a meaningless blip on the radar?
That makes sense. How do you convince stakeholders who are used to the traditional metrics that those numbers might not tell the whole story? Are there companies that made tough choices based on this innovation accounting?
Ries talks about Grocket. They did online test prep. They thought they were doing amazing based on signups and things like that.
But it's all an illusion.
Yeah, they were busy, sure, but they weren't making a real impact. Their key metrics weren't showing any real effect on customer learning.
So how do you avoid falling into that trap? How do you figure out the metrics that truly matter?
It comes down to understanding something Ries calls your engine of growth. He says there are three main types: sticky, viral, and paid.
Okay, can you break those down a little? What makes them different?
Sure. A sticky engine focuses on keeping customers coming back for more, like think Netflix or Spotify.
Makes sense. What about viral growth? That one seems pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, that's all about leveraging word of mouth and network effects. Think Facebook, right? Each new user brings in their friends and so on.
Turning customers into advocates. Got it. And then there's the paid engine.
Exactly. That relies on advertising and other paid methods to acquire customers. Big e-commerce players like Amazon rely heavily on that.
So each engine has its own unique ways of working. You can't just use a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. And Ries emphasizes figuring out which engine works best for your business and then putting all your energy into optimizing it. Spreading yourself too thin across all three can lead to confusion and wasted effort.
So focus is key. Master one before trying to juggle them all. But even when you've got that figured out, there's still that big question. Pivot or persevere?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the lean startup approach helps you figure that out. It's about deciding whether to stick to your original plan or make a significant change based on what you've learned.
When do you know it's time to pivot? I mean, sometimes setbacks are just part of the journey, right?
Of course. But the lean startup encourages you to look at the data, not just your gut feelings. Take Vodafone. They were a civic engagement platform. They pivoted multiple times, each time testing their new hypothesis faster.
And each pivot brought them closer to a viable model.
Exactly. They really embraced the idea of iteration, using each failure as a stepping stone. It highlights an important point. Product market fit isn't something you achieve just once.
So it's not a destination, it's a journey of continuous improvement.
You got it. And what's fascinating is that it's not just about chasing profits. It's about maximizing your impact, doing away with wasted effort, and truly creating something valuable for your customers.
That's a great point. It's about long-term value, not just those quick wins. But let's be real, building an MVP and pivoting, it takes guts. A lot of entrepreneurs struggle to release anything that's not perfect. How does Ries address that fear?
He believes that perfectionism can paralyze you. With an MVP, the goal isn't flawlessness. It's about gathering those learnings. Even the biggest companies out there often started with MVPs that were, well, pretty rough around the edges.
That's reassuring, actually. It's about getting that feedback loop going, even if it means releasing something that's not totally polished.
Exactly. And then there's the challenge of internal resistance. Especially in established companies, people can be hesitant to embrace these new ways of working.
So it's not just about convincing your customers, it's convincing your own team. How do you overcome that skepticism?
By being really clear about the benefits of the lean startup and addressing people's concerns, sometimes starting with some small experiments can really showcase the value of this method.
Okay, so prove it works on a small scale, then build up from there.
Right. But Reese takes it even further. He believes this whole lean startup movement has implications far beyond just the business world.
Interesting. You're saying it's a whole new way of thinking that can be applied anywhere.
Exactly. We live in a time of incredible technology, right? But we're still figuring out what to do with it all. The lean startup gives us a framework for navigating that uncertainty and discovering what truly matters.
So it's about replacing guesswork with real, validated learning and creating organizations that are adaptable and can thrive in a constantly changing world.
Exactly. It's like a 21st century scientific management movement.
I like that. Okay, we've covered MVPs, pivoting, data-driven cultures. But what about the human side of all this? How does this lean startup approach shape a company's culture?
It's a crucial question. You see, traditional corporate cultures, they emphasize avoiding risk, and they have those rigid hierarchies. All that can really stifle innovation.
So a successful startup needs a different kind of environment.
Definitely. In a lean startup culture, failure is seen as a chance to learn. People are encouraged to take ownership and be bold in their experiments.
Sounds like trust and transparency are vital.
Absolutely. Open communication is key. Everyone needs to be on the same page and feel empowered to share their ideas.
So how do you build that kind of culture? It seems like a huge shift from the traditional corporate world.
Well, it starts with defining your company values, making sure they align with the lean startup method.
So it's not just talk, it's walking the walk.
Exactly. Leading by example is crucial, and create opportunities for people to learn and grow. Think training programs, hackathons, those sorts of things.
So empower people to experiment and innovate. Don't just tell them to follow orders.
Exactly. And celebrate both the successes and the failures, because even those failures are valuable learning moments.
So we're talking about a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about work and innovation.
Exactly. And that brings us to the role of leadership in a lean startup organization.
Okay, leadership. How is that different in a lean startup?
Traditional executives, they often focus on control, being in charge, but lean startup leaders need a different approach. They have to be okay with uncertainty and be willing to let their teams experiment and learn.
So it's less about having all the answers and more about guiding and supporting the team.
Exactly. They need to be visionaries, yes, but also humble enough to admit when they're wrong, to change course when needed.
It's a delicate balance.
It is. You need to build trust and accountability so people feel empowered.
That makes sense. Building a strong team is crucial for any startup.
Right. Absolutely. And the lean startup approach recognizes that. It's not just about individual talent, but creating an environment where everyone can thrive and collaborate.
So it's about building a culture, finding the right fit, not just focusing on resumes and skills.
Exactly. Teams in a lean startup environment need to be adaptable, resilient, and truly believe in the company's mission.
It's about finding people who not only have the skills but share the values, who are genuinely excited to be a part of what you're building.
Absolutely. And creating that culture where they feel valued and empowered to do their best work.
So building a strong team really goes hand in hand with creating the right company culture.
That's a great point.
Let's go back to validated learning for a moment. That seems to be a thread that runs through the whole lean startup philosophy.
It absolutely does. It's at the core of the lean startup approach. It's what sets it apart from those traditional methods that are all about assumptions and predictions.
So instead of trying to predict what's going to happen, you're constantly testing your ideas against reality.
Exactly. And it's not just a one-time thing. It has to be embedded in everything your company does.
So how do you actually put that into practice?
Ries has this simple but really effective framework he calls the build, measure, learn loop.
Interesting. How does that work?
The first step is to create that minimum viable product. Then you measure how customers use it, what their feedback is.
Gathering data, essentially.
Right. And then you learn, you analyze that data and see what it tells you about your initial assumptions.
So you use those learnings to decide whether to stick with your current approach or make a change.
Exactly. And that decision to change course is what Ries calls pivoting.
Pivoting. We've touched on it, but for anyone who's just joining us, can you explain what that means and why it's so important?
It basically means changing direction based on what you've learned. It's not admitting defeat. It's about being smart and adapting.
But it must be tough to let go of your original vision, especially when you've poured so much into it.
Definitely. But Ries argues that the longer you wait to pivot, the harder it becomes. You might end up with technical debt or miss crucial opportunities.
So it's better to adjust early, even if it means you were wrong about something.
Exactly. And remember, pivoting isn't random. It's a decision based on the data you gather through the build, measure, learn loop.
Okay, so it's not about changing course blindly. It's about using information to make informed decisions. But doesn't pivoting carry its own risks? What if you keep changing and never find solid ground?
That's a valid concern, but Ries argues that the key is to be decisive. Don't be afraid to experiment, but don't hesitate.
It's about finding that balance between being agile and committed to the vision.
Right. And to make the right decisions, you need to build a company culture that encourages constant innovation.
That sounds amazing, but how do you create that kind of environment where innovation isn't just a one-time thing, but something that's happening all the time?
It's not about creating a separate innovation department or relying on a few creative people. It's about making innovation everyone's responsibility.
So empower everyone to contribute ideas, to experiment.
Exactly. But it requires a mindset shift. Companies need to embrace experimentation and see failure as an opportunity to learn.
So create a safe space where people feel comfortable taking risks, trying new things, and they're not punished for making mistakes.
Precisely. And encourage collaboration and knowledge sharing. Let people learn from each other's experiences and build on those ideas.
That sounds pretty different from how most corporations operate. But the potential is enormous.
It is. By fostering that kind of environment, companies can unlock incredible creative potential in their employees and drive real innovation.
That leads perfectly into the topic of attracting and retaining top talent, which is vital for any startup. It's no secret that talent is key to success, but how do you attract and keep the best people in this competitive market?
It goes beyond just offering great salaries and benefits. It's about creating a workplace where people feel valued, challenged, and empowered.
So it's about culture and purpose.
Exactly. Lean startup companies need to offer their employees the chance to learn, to grow, to work on problems that matter, and be part of something bigger than themselves.
So it's about providing meaning and purpose in their work.
Right. And to do that effectively, you need to be clear about your vision and values. People want to work for companies doing meaningful things, things that align with their own beliefs.
It's about attracting people who are passionate about the mission, not just the paycheck.
Exactly. Offer opportunities for growth so people can continue to learn and advance in their careers.
So invest in your employees and help them reach their potential. It's not just what they do for the company, but what the company can do for them.
Right. And create a culture of transparency and open communication. Make sure people feel informed and connected to the goals of the company.
So building a strong company culture is really at the heart of attracting and keeping great people.
It absolutely is. And that brings us back to one of the core concepts, the minimum viable product, or MVP.
The MVP. We've talked about it in general terms, but let's dig a bit deeper. Why is it so crucial in the lean startup methodology?
The MVP lets startups test their ideas quickly and affordably before investing tons of resources. It's about managing risk and avoiding costly mistakes.
So it's about validating your assumptions before going all in.
Exactly. Race emphasizes that the MVP should be designed with a specific question in mind. It's not about creating something cool for the sake of it. It's about building something that will give you valuable information.
So it needs to be strategic, not just a bunch of random features.
Right. And it's about getting that MVP into the hands of your customers ASAP. Don't wait until it's perfect. Get it out there and start getting feedback.
So it's about that iterative process, being willing to release something that might not be perfect, but is all about learning.
Exactly. And that's how startups can build MVPs that help them quickly find their way to a successful product.
Okay, so we have the MVP to test assumptions. But how do we know what to build in the first place? How do you make sure you're building the right thing?
That's where data becomes essential. Reesers is a huge advocate for using data to guide every decision in a startup.
Makes sense. We live in a data-driven world. But how do you make sure you don't get lost in the numbers? How do you know which data points are the ones that really matter?
Reeses stresses the importance of focusing on actionable metrics, metrics that can guide your decisions and help you track progress toward your goals.
So you're not just collecting data for the sake of it, you're using it to make informed decisions.
Right. And those metrics need to align with your overall company strategy and the growth engine you've chosen.
So if your engine is viral growth, you'd focus on metrics like viral coefficient and referral rates.
Exactly. And those metrics need to be things you can actually measure and track so you can see how things are changing over time and whether your efforts are having the desired effect.
So data is key. But what about the human side? How do you build a company culture that really supports these lean startup principles?
It's crucial to remember that culture isn't something you can create overnight. It takes time and effort to build.
So it's more than just writing a mission statement or putting up motivational posters.
Exactly. It's the behaviors, values, and beliefs that drive your actions.
So it's how people act, how they interact, not just what's written down.
Right. And a lean startup culture embraces things like experimentation, learning from mistakes, and being able to adapt.
So people are encouraged to try new things, learn from their missteps, and be flexible.
Exactly. And to build that kind of culture, you have to be intentional about it.
What are some concrete steps leaders can take to foster that lean startup culture?
It begins with being clear about your company values and making sure those values are reflected in everything the company does. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
So lead by example.
Absolutely. And celebrate both the wins and the losses. Create a positive, supportive environment where people feel okay taking risks.
So encourage trying new things and see those failures as chances to learn.
Exactly. And create a culture of open communication and feedback. Let people share their ideas and insights.
It sounds like a very different approach than what you see in most companies.
It is, but the rewards can be immense.
This has been incredibly insightful. The Lean Startup offers a really fresh perspective on building and growing a business.
It really does. And you know what's great? It's a framework that can be used in any industry, in any size company, even for personal projects.
That's right. The principles are universal. So if you're listening, think about this. What's one assumption you're making in your own work that you could test with a simple MVP?
You might be surprised by the results. It could lead to some breakthroughs.
That's a great challenge. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, expert speaker.
It's been my pleasure.
And for everyone listening, stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the Lean Startup, where we'll explore even more of the book's insights and advice.
So we've covered validated learning, building a business that can last, but there's another big piece of the lean startup we got to talk about: building a company culture that embraces innovation constantly.
Continuous innovation sounds great, but also like one of those business buzzwords. How do you actually make that happen?
Ries is really clear about this. It's not about having a separate innovation department or relying on a few geniuses. It's got to be everyone's job.
So everyone's empowered to contribute ideas, experiment, try new stuff.
Exactly. But it means changing how we think. Instead of fearing failure, companies need to embrace it, see it as a chance to learn.
That's a tough one, especially in those traditional companies. Making mistakes is often seen as a bad thing.
It is a challenge, for sure. But to be truly innovative, you got to create a safe space, a space where people feel comfortable taking risks, trying new things, and if it doesn't work out, no big deal, no punishment.
It's about creating a culture where people feel supported.
Exactly. And encouraging collaboration, sharing knowledge, people learn from each other's experiences, build on each other's ideas.
So it's not just about individual brilliance, it's about the whole team learning and growing together.
Right on. Ries believes that by doing this, by creating this kind of environment, companies can unleash incredible creative potential.
It's like tapping into the collective intelligence, not just relying on a few people.
And when you have that kind of culture, Attracting and keeping top talent becomes so much easier.
Okay, let's talk talent. Getting those great people on board, it's essential, especially for startups going up against those big established companies.
Totally agree. Reese's makes a great point. It's not just about offering the biggest paycheck and fancy perks. You need a workplace where people feel valued, challenged, where they feel like they can actually make a difference.
So it's more than just the money. It's about culture, purpose, that feeling of doing something meaningful.
Exactly. In a lean startup, employees need to feel like they can learn, grow, solve real problems, be a part of something bigger.
So it's about having a purpose.
Right. And to do that, you got to be super clear about your company's vision and values. People are attracted to companies that stand for something, companies that align with what they believe in.
You attract people who are passionate about the mission, not just chasing a paycheck.
Exactly. Give them opportunities to grow, to learn new things, to advance their careers.
So invest in your employees, help them reach their potential. It's not just what they give to the company, it's what the company gives back to them.
Right. And be transparent. Communicate openly. Make sure people feel connected to the company's goals and are in the loop.
It really all comes down to that company culture.
It does. And that takes us to building a strong brand, which is crucial.
Okay, branding. It's essential for any company, but for startups just starting out, it can be really challenging. Where do you even begin?
Brady stresses that branding is more than a logo or slogan. It's about building a reputation, quality, innovation, customer focus.
So it's the overall image people have of your company.
Right. And it needs a strategic approach. You can't leave it to chance.
So how do you build a brand in the crazy, fast-paced startup world?
Focus on the customer experience. Make it consistently good.
So happy customers, they feel like you care.
Exactly. And be transparent, authentic. Don't try to be something you're not.
So build trust by being real.
Right. And build a community around your brand. Engage with your customers. Give them valuable content. Make them feel like they belong.
Have a real conversation with them, not just talk at them.
Exactly. By doing those things, startups can create strong brands that resonate with people, brands that set them apart.
Create a brand that represents something that people connect with on an emotional level.
Absolutely. And it all circles back to the engine of growth idea. Remember we talked about that?
Right, those sticky, viral, and paid engines. They each have their own quirks, and you need a different strategy for each.
Exactly. As a startup grows, it needs to understand what's driving that growth and focus on making that engine run even better.
Play your strengths, basically.
Exactly. And as you scale, try to maintain that agility, that ability to adapt that you had in the beginning.
That's got to be tough as things get bigger and more complicated. How do you keep from getting bogged down in all that?
One of the keys is to empower your teams. Let them make decisions, take ownership of their work.
So push those decisions down closer to the customer.
Exactly. And always be looking for ways to do things better, faster, that constant improvement mindset.
So even as you grow, keep those lean startup principles at the forefront.
Totally. And you need a strong leadership team.
Okay, leadership. What makes a great leader in a lean startup environment?
They got to be okay with not knowing everything, with uncertainty, and they got to be willing to let their teams experiment, learn.
So less about being the boss and more about guiding, supporting.
Exactly. They got to be visionaries, inspire their teams, but also humble, able to admit when they're wrong to change course.
That's like a balancing act.
It is. They also have to be great communicators, got to be able to explain the vision, the strategy to everyone.
So everyone's moving in the same direction.
And they need to build trust. If there's no trust, you can't have that experimentation, that innovation.
That makes sense.
And they got to be passionate about learning for themselves and their teams.
Always learning new things, yeah.
Exactly. It's a demanding role, being a lean startup leader, but also really rewarding. You're not just building a company, you're building a culture. And that can have a huge impact.
Okay, so we've covered building a team, the brand, the business model. But what about the product itself? What's the lean startup approach to product development?
One of the core principles, again, is the minimum viable product, the MVP.
Right, we've talked about that. But just to refresh our memory, why is it so important?
It lets startups test their ideas without breaking the bank before they commit a lot of resources. It's about managing risk, preventing big, costly mistakes.
Okay, so test before you go all in.
Exactly. And Ries stresses that the MVP has to be designed to answer a specific question. Don't just build something because it sounds cool, build it to get information.
Strategic, focused.
Right. And get it to your customers as fast as you can. Perfection isn't the goal here, learning is.
It's that iterative process again. Release something that's not finished, but learn from it.
Exactly. And that's how startups can build MVPs that help them quickly get to a product that people will actually want.
So we've got the MVP, but how do you know where to start? How do you make sure you're building something people will want?
Data is crucial here. Rees is all about using data to drive decisions.
Makes sense in this data-driven world,
Yeah.
but there's so much data. How do you not drown in it?
Rees says you focus on actionable metrics, things you can actually use to make decisions, track your progress.
Not just collecting data because you can.
Right. And those metrics should match up with your company's strategy and that growth engine we were talking about.
Like if it's viral growth, you track things like the viral coefficient, how many people each user brings in.
Exactly. You have to be able to measure it, track it, see how things are changing, and whether what you're doing is actually working.
Data is king. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about something that can be a bit uncomfortable. Failure.
Failure. It's something every entrepreneur has to deal with at some point. But the lean startup approach says it's not a bad thing.
So you're saying embrace it.
Exactly. It's seen as a chance to learn.
Not about avoiding it, but about figuring out why it happened and using that to get better.
Exactly. And one tool for figuring out those whys is something called the 5 whys technique.
The 5 whys. How does that work?
It's simple but effective. You just keep asking why 5 times in a row.
Sounds a bit too simple.
But it works. Each time you ask why, you dig deeper into the problem.
Like peeling back the layers of an onion until you find the root cause.
Right. And a lot of times, the real reason something happened isn't what you thought it was at first.
So it helps you see things from a different angle.
And once you know the root cause, you can find solutions that really work.
So it's not just about figuring out what went wrong, it's about using that to improve.
Exactly. It's all about constantly learning, always improving.
And that takes us back to that culture of innovation, where trying new things and learning from mistakes is encouraged.
You got it. The 5 whys is a great example of how you can apply lean startup principles to every part of your business.
Okay, we've covered a lot, but there's one more thing I want to touch on. This idea of innovation accounting.
Yes, innovation accounting. Really important in the lean startup world. It helps you measure how you're doing in a way that matches your goals.
So we're not talking about those typical metrics like revenue.
Right. It's about measuring the learning, the progress you're making, even if it doesn't show up in your bank account right away.
So track the right metrics, make sure you're headed in the right direction.
Exactly. One of the key ideas is to use cohorts.
Cohorts, what are those?
It's just a group of customers who share something in common. Like maybe they all signed up for your service during the same month.
So you group customers based on when they joined.
Right. And the reason you do that is so you can track their behavior over time.
See how your product is performing with different groups of customers.
Exactly. And use that information to make improvements.
So, for example, if one group of customers is leaving your service more than others, you try to figure out why.
Exactly. And another thing is learning milestones.
Okay, learning milestones. What are those?
It's basically a goal, something specific you set for yourself that'll help you learn more about your customers or your business.
Like, maybe you set a goal to do 10 customer interviews next month.
Exactly. This helps you stay focused on what you need to learn, even when things are crazy busy.
So make sure you're moving toward your goals, even if you don't see results immediately.
That's the idea. And then be open with your team, your investors, about your progress.
Share what you're learning, the good and the bad.
Exactly. And be honest about the challenges so you can get help.
So innovation accounting is more than just numbers.
It's a culture of transparency, accountability.
It's an integral part of the lean startup. We've covered so much ground today. It all comes back to building a company that can adapt, that's innovative, that puts the customer first.
That's it. The lean startup isn't just a toolbox. It's a way of thinking that can totally change how you approach building a business.
And it can be used in any industry, any size company, even for your own projects.
Right. Embrace experimenting, learning from failures, and being able to adapt.
And having that sense of purpose, loving what you do.
And never giving up.
I love that. So one last thought. What are some of the biggest hurdles startups face when trying to implement these lean startup ideas?
One of the biggest is the fear of putting something out there that isn't perfect.
Yeah, I can see that. Many entrepreneurs want everything to be just right before they launch.
It's understandable, but Ries says that fear can stop you dead in your tracks. Remember, the MVP isn't supposed to be a finished product. It's about getting information, validating your assumptions as quickly as possible.
So be okay with the process. Be okay with putting something out there that's not perfect, because it's all about the feedback.
Right. And, even the most successful companies, their first products were often far from perfect.
That's good to hear. It takes some of the pressure off.
Exactly. Another big one is internal resistance. You got to convince your own team, your stakeholders.
Not just convincing customers, convincing your own people.
Right, especially in companies that have been around for a while. People get used to doing things a certain way.
Like the traditional waterfall approach to development, those detailed business plans.
Yeah, you got to clearly explain the benefits of the lean startup, address their concerns.
So educate, be transparent, get everyone on board.
Exactly. Maybe even start with some small experiments. Show them how it works.
Prove it works on a small scale, then go bigger.
That's the idea. Once they see the positive results, it'll be easier to get everyone on board.
Makes sense. Let's step back a bit. What about the bigger picture? What does Ries say about the impact of the lean startup movement?
He believes it has the power to change not just how companies work, but how we approach innovation and problem solving in general.
So it's bigger than just starting companies. It's a new way of thinking.
Exactly. Rees says that we're living in this time of crazy technological advancement. We can build almost anything, but we're still trying to figure out what to build.
That's deep. We have the tools, but we don't always know what to do with them.
Right. And that's where the lean startup comes in. It gives us a way to navigate that uncertainty and figure out what's truly valuable.
Replace guessing with real learning.
Exactly. Gordy's even compares it to other movements that have changed how we work, like that scientific management thing back in the early 1900s.
So he sees it as part of this bigger trend.
Right. And he challenges us to think about how we can use lean startup ideas to tackle those huge problems facing the world.
That's pretty inspiring, using it to make a real difference.
And he's optimistic, thinks it can spark a wave of innovation and create a better future.
Love that vision. And it's cool to think we can be a part of it.
Speaking of making things happen, let's talk about another critical aspect of building a successful startup: execution.
Right. Because you can have all the great ideas in the world, but if you can't execute them, they're just ideas.
Exactly. And the lean startup methodology has a lot to say about how to do that effectively.
So what's the secret to good execution?
One of the most important things is working in small batches.
Small batches. What does that mean?
It means breaking your work down into smaller pieces.
So instead of trying to do everything at once, focus on one small task at a time.
You got it. And the reason this is so important is that you get feedback faster and can adapt more quickly.
You're constantly learning and improving.
Right on. It also helps to minimize risk. If you mess up, it's a smaller mess, easier to fix.
So it's about being agile, adaptable.
Exactly. Another big thing is continuous deployment.
Continuous deployment. What's that?
It means releasing new features as soon as they're ready, instead of waiting for one big launch.
So get your product in the hands of customers quickly. Get their feedback.
Exactly. This way you make sure you're building something people actually want.
Validating your assumptions early on.
Right. And it keeps your team motivated. They see their work going live.
Creates a sense of momentum.
Exactly. And lastly, lean startup execution is data-driven.
Right. We talked about that earlier, about using data to learn.
Yeah, but it's important during execution too. You got to track your progress, measure your results, make decisions based on the data.
So be scientific about it.
Precisely. Data will help you see what's working, what's not, and how to improve.
Okay, so we've talked about a ton of stuff today, but there's one more big idea I want to bring up. Building an adaptive organization.
Ah, yes, that's a crucial concept. It's all about building a company that can thrive in a world that's constantly changing.
So a company that's agile, resilient, ready for anything.
Exactly. There are several principles that go into creating an adaptive organization.
Give me some examples.
One of the most important is decentralized decision-making.
So instead of every decision coming from the top, you give people at all levels the power to make choices.
Right. And that's important because it helps you move faster, react to change more effectively.
Because the people closest to the customer, they're often the best ones to make those decisions.
Exactly. Another key principle is continuous learning.
So everyone's always learning, growing.
Exactly. Encourage experimentation, see failure as a learning opportunity, offer chances for professional development.
A learning organization.
Exactly. And finally, every adaptive organization needs a clear purpose.
So everyone knows why they're doing what they're doing.
Exactly. This keeps people motivated even when things get tough.
So building an adaptive organization is about more than just being successful. It's about creating something meaningful.
Totally agree. And it's a journey, it's not a destination.
Okay, we've covered so much ground. But let me ask you a question I think a lot of people are wondering. What does all this mean for me?
Great question. The Lean Startup isn't just for entrepreneurs. It's a framework that can be applied to anything you do. Starting a business, sure, but also new projects, even just improving how you work.
So it's about trying things out, learning from those failures, being flexible,
Exactly. Have a clear purpose and be passionate.
and never give up.
Exactly. So if you're inspired by what we've talked about, start experimenting with these Lean Startup ideas.
You might be surprised by the results.
We've talked about so much, validated learning, adaptive organizations, but there's one more piece, the innovation sandbox.
Innovation Sandbox, that's a new one. What is that?
Imagine a safe space in your company where teams can experiment, try new things, and it's okay if they fail.
So a place to play around with innovation.
Exactly. Try new stuff, test those assumptions, learn from mistakes, and it doesn't mess up the main business.
That makes sense, especially for bigger companies that might be scared to take risks.
Right. Innovation sandboxes let them try out those lean startup ideas without betting the whole company.
Okay, so how does it work?
You create a dedicated team, a unit that focuses just on innovation.
And they can experiment outside of the usual way the business runs.
Right. Give them a budget, some resources, and a clear goal. Innovate.
But there are still metrics, goals, right? So you can track their progress.
Of course, it's not a free-for-all. It's about giving them freedom, but also making sure they're accountable.
So, like a controlled experiment, the perfect environment for innovation to happen.
Exactly. One of the great things is that companies can fail quickly and cheaply.
Because if something doesn't work out, it doesn't hurt the main business.
Right. And then you learn from those failures, and that helps you innovate even better in the future.
So it's about making innovation less risky, more about trying things out.
Exactly. And it can help attract those talented people.
Because smart people want to work where they can be creative, make a real difference.
Exactly. Innovation sandboxes are a great tool for companies that want to be more like a lean startup.
This has been amazing. I've learned so much about how to build a successful business in today's world.
And the best part is, these ideas can be used anywhere, not just in business.
It's a way of thinking that can help you be more creative, more adaptable, more successful, no matter what you're doing.
So if you're listening, try it out. Start experimenting with these lean startup ideas.
You might just surprise yourself.
And remember, start small, make changes quickly, and don't ever give up on those dreams.
That's fantastic advice. Thanks so much for joining us today, expert speaker.
My pleasure.
And everyone listening, thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep innovating.